Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a new device that I got that I wasn't sure if I wanted or not initially, and that is the Steam Deck. This finally arrived to me in Q2 just like they said it would. I went ahead and got the 256 gig version of this. I did not opt for the 512 version. I didn't feel I needed that version. I thought the 256 would give me enough flexibility to load a number of games on the internal SSD and then use a micro SD card for the rest. Anything that I think didn't need to load that fast, or emulation, or a mix of both. So, with that said, I got this on Sunday and I've been messing with it since then. What do I think of it? Well, let's take a look at it from the hardware perspective first. Looking over the unit, it's pretty wide. It's wider than a Switch. It's also heavier than a Switch. However, when you're holding it, given the way it has these grips on the back, does not feel as awkward to hold as a Switch. It fits in your hand and rests in your hands really well, and the weight is well distributed, so that it feels pretty good to hold for long periods of time. It doesn't really get in the way or anything like that. I had it laid down on my lap a couple times. I didn't really have any major issues with it with what I was running, but for the most part I was running a few older games like Sonic Generations, Chrono Trigger, things of that nature. I did a little bit of Doom Eternal on it, and I have loaded Dead or Alive 6 on it, and Darius Burst Chronicles. And I loaded a couple of Castlevania games that I have not booted up yet. So, overall, I'd say for a hardware package, weight-wise, weight distribution, that's good. The screen looks great. It's a good size, good viewable area. I never had any problem reading any text. The touchscreen on it's nice and responsive. It works pretty well as a keyboard inside of Steam. I didn't try using it in desktop mode that way, and yes, there is a desktop mode to this unit that you can get into. You have to press and hold the power button for a short period of time, and then it'll give you an option to either power down, put it in sleep mode, or go out to the desktop. The desktop I found a little problematic the first time I went to it because everything was in what they call light mode, which whoever designed that needs their head examined, because white text on a white background, not a good idea. I don't know why you thought about that way. That was a really dumb idea. So the first thing I did was I changed the wallpaper and I changed it to a dark mode, which still left the text white and made everything else a darker color. So I could actually see half the icons, which were white, and see the text. So I could actually navigate the operating system in a reasonable manner. If you guys need a walkthrough on that, let me know. I'll work that up. I stumbled through it in the middle of the night while I was half asleep, so I'm not going to try to walk through it here. I'll have to recreate it. As far as using the unit as a Steam apparatus, everything works great. It will tell you whether or not the thing is certified to run effectively on the Steam Deck, and it will give you the option of looking at all your games that you have on Steam, and you have the option of installing them whether or not they're certified or not. When you go to the store, it will do the same thing. It will initially tell you and start to promote you some of the top games, and more or less try to show you most of the stuff that's more compatible with the Steam Deck rather than Steam as a whole. You can always search, find any game you want, and it will give you a little marker whether or not it's not been tested, whether or not it's works mostly, which usually is kind of like an orange indicator or a green mark that basically says, hey, this should run great on the Steam Deck. And you can install accordingly. Now, in my experimentation, I installed both things that were certified on the Steam Deck and things that were not certified on the Steam Deck, and at least one game that was kind of on Steam Deck. For the most part, I didn't have any major problems. Everything that was checkmarked that it worked on the Steam Deck, that being Sonic Generations and Doom Eternal, worked great, no problem. You might have a little bit of fidelity and resolution drop. Obviously, you're running it on a handheld. Obviously, it's not going to be able to push it back up to the same spec that it would if you had a good, well-built PC. But if you wanted to use it as a handheld and you want to try to cast it up at 720p onto your TV, or even in some cases be able to push it to 1080p, you might be able to do that. Caveat with that is Dead or Alive 6 seems to run really well in 720p. Does not run so great on 1080p. It's a little slow. It doesn't break, it doesn't crash, it just feels a little sluggish to me. It feels a lot more responsive and quick when I'm running in 720p mode on the Steam Deck. And that is one of the games that's not even checkmarked that it's been tested at all on the Steam Deck. Another one that hasn't been tested at all is Darius Burst Chronicles. That one came up, it recognized the resolution of the screen, I got into it, and it played perfectly fine. I had no issues playing that, other than the fact that I still suck at the game. Moving on to one that was kind of on the Steam Deck, that was Chrono Trigger. That ran great for the most part. There was only one caveat that I had with it, and that's every time I went in to try to change the name of my character, be it like Chrono's name or Nadia's name or anybody's name in the game, when I went into the keyboard option to change the name, was done with my selection and hit enter, I couldn't move out of that field again. It would stay highlighted and I could backspace and add spaces. Even if I just added a number of spaces, like say I gave it a shorter name than the maximum name length, and just added spaces to try to fill out the field so that it would allow me to move out, it wouldn't. Even touching the screen to try to hit accept wouldn't work. I could not get out of the field. So if you're okay with just using the default names for the characters, which I commonly don't care, it works great. I have no problems running it. I've run it for several hours and had zero issues. DOA, I ran that for probably 30-40 minutes, and the only issue I had is the unit got very, very warm. And it pretty much tore through the battery. Now, that was partially because I was outputting it to a monitor at the same time, and I did not have my docking station plugged into an external power supply, so it was just relaying and using the internal battery. That could have been part of it. Part of it, I think, is just it's going to get warm when it's running something that's graphically intensive. DOA 6 is not the best optimized game in the world. So, it having a few issues with heat and graphical resolution and slowdown, not a huge surprise to me. They did not do the most amazing job on that game for PC, in my opinion. It runs fine, but it's always been a bit of a resource hog. And a bit of a bear sometimes with some of the stuff that they wanted to do. And I don't understand why, because Tekken has much more advanced stages and feels like it doesn't take nearly the same resources did Alive 6 does. So I don't know what they did, but I feel like they did it wrong. Either way, it runs, even sending it to a computer monitor, just fine. Now, as far as the other games on it, I haven't done that much experimentation. I bought Sonic Mania, I bought the Castlevania Adventure Collection, the DS Collection, and I have not had a chance to set up emulation or test Game Pass yet. Those are all things that are going to be coming to the channel. I'm also going to be doing videos that pretty much goes into some of these games that aren't necessarily certified or maybe don't work so great that I'm interested in and loading them on here and giving you guys impressions of those, how they work, what are some of the pitfalls, what works, what doesn't work, is it worth even installing on your Steam Deck? So that you guys know, even if it doesn't have that check mark, some of these games will work. And you'll know because I've tested them and I've told you that they work regardless. So hopefully you guys will enjoy those videos. As far as my impression of this and my overall overview of this so far, having lived with it for a couple days, like less than a week, I'm happy with my purchase. As far as the physical hardware, there's a couple of caveats. The buttons, the A, B, X, Y buttons are smaller than I expected, but that's not too much of a detriment. They're also a little closer together than I expected, but they still work really well. I don't stumble over any of them. They all work great. The analog sticks are a bit of a disappointment. Not in how they function. They respond well, but the fact that they're more of an older plastic style analog stick, which is probably good for taking a beating, but they don't have that same texture that an Xbox One controller has, or that the PS5 has with its analog sticks. They do have a molded texture around the edges so that your fingers don't just completely slip off of them, but they don't have any rubberized texturing on top of them. You could probably fix that with putting something over the top of them if you really wanted to, but by default, your fingers don't want to stay on them as well as they probably should. Let's put it that way. The D-pad feels a lot more slick than it should because it's a gloss finish on it. Doesn't have any texture to it at all, which means it feels very much like a PlayStation 5 or PSP D-pad without the recessed section. It's a completely raised D-pad that's enameled plastic. So while it works really well, I found my thumb moving around on that a little bit more play than I would have on most other D-pads that have like some sort of texture, like an 8-bit D-pad or any other D-pad, quite frankly. Now, does this hinder with any of the gameplay on any of these? Not really. I might not want to do really long sessions of Doom Eternal, because it might be a little awkward to do with this kind of setup, but coming from perspective of a PC player, I would rather do that with a mouse and keyboard for the most part anyway. Now, do saves transfer between the two? I don't really know that yet. That's something else I'll probably dig into for the final review of this thing, because I want to live with it a little bit longer. I want to play more things. I want to install some things like Horizon, play around with that on the Steam Deck, and then go back to my PC and see if where I saved gets uploaded to the cloud, so that it'll transfer back down, so that I can, like, pick this up, take this on the go, play my game for a little bit, come back, put it down, boot it up on my PC, and start right off where I was. That's the advantage of something like the Evercade has with the VS, where you can pop your card out with a save state, put it in your Evercade, go on the go, play your games, come back, pop it back in the VS with your save state, and then you can boot it up because it's all saved on the card. Now, if this puts your saves into the cloud and those get transferred back and forth, in theory, you should be able to play your PC games on your PC, take a lot of them on your Steam Deck, play them on your Steam Deck for a while, if you're on a trip or whatnot, and when you come back, your progress should still be there on your PC, and that would make this a very useful tool for most PC players, and an advantage that they have not had in an ecosystem, unless you have something like, say, a laptop or something that will run some of these. And this seems more convenient to me to travel with than a laptop, unless you're going to do more things with the laptop than just play games. This just seems more convenient. Now, I'm also going to do digging into the emulation, like I stated to you guys. I'll do digging into Game Pass, like I said. Emulation, I think I've got a good beat on how to set that up. I just want to get the docking station connected up downstairs somewhere where I can show it on a monitor, or maybe I'll hook it up here through the Elgato and hook a mouse and keyboard up to it and run it that way, and be able to, like, record what I'm doing as I'm doing it, and I can walk you guys through it. That way, if you do decide to pick up one of these, then you'll know exactly how to do it. Now, a few more things about the hardware before I kind of wrap this up a little bit, because I've kind of been all over the board because I didn't script this. The touchpads on this unit, on the front here, these are little touchpads. These work pretty well. I found them pretty useful in desktop mode. One lets you just move around and left click, and one lets you right click. They kind of seem like reverse land, because it seemed like anytime I wanted to right click, I needed to click the left one. Anytime I needed to, like, left click, I needed to click on the right one, which was weird to get used to, but it works fine. They do have a nice kind of haptic feedback as you're moving along on the touchpad screen here to try to move it along. And I thought that actually felt pretty nice. I think you can actually turn that off in the settings if you don't prefer that. I didn't find it much of a hindrance. I actually kind of liked it. As far as the functionality when you're actually in the deck and you're playing the game, my fears of actually touching the touchpads here and having it accidentally move things are completely unfounded. I never had that issue. So I'm glad to see that that was not the problem that I thought it might be with the initial design. One, because if you've got your fingers either resting on the analog sticks, your thumb is raised just enough that I'm not even really touching the touchpad while I'm messing with it. And if I'm on the D-pad and just the buttons, my hands are away enough from it that I don't accidentally touch them as well. I have to deliberately reach down to use these, which is good. That means even if they're enabled, I'm probably not going to accidentally hit them. And that was a real concern for me. The bumper and triggers on this thing feel great. They're nice and responsive. They're nice and clicky. They're very easy to reach. They don't feel out of place. They feel exactly like where they should be, so that you can use them anytime you want to. I had no problem using them in Doom Eternal at all. Matter of fact, I didn't have any problems really doing anything except for aiming effectively in Doom Eternal, and that's just because I'm more of a mouse and keyboard guy than I am an analog stick person. That's a personal preference for me. I feel more comfortable with it. I feel like my aim's better with it. Not that my aim is great in any of these games, it's just better there than it is with analog sticks. Take away from that what you will. The Steam button itself is a little harder to reach, and I find it's so recessed that it's almost flat, so I'm almost going to have to look down to hit it. And then a lot of times, even when I press it, it doesn't really have much of a click, but it will bring up the menu pretty promptly and pretty quickly, and you can jump out of games, you can go into your settings, you can change all sorts of things from there. That's no problem. Getting an SD card running on this thing was also not an issue. I installed it, I went into the settings, I formatted it, and every game that I went to install on the Steam Deck gave me the option of installing it on the local memory or on the SD card. That was not an issue at all in any respect. The buttons on the back, also a little weird. I don't know if I like those. I'll be honest. I thought that was going to be an advantage of this thing, but I feel like I have to like really kind of squeeze the controller and hold it in a weird way in order to effectively push those. Like I have to grip the thing more tightly than I would otherwise, because they're a little hard to press and they're kind of flat. So my finger has to like kind of be in a weird spot to either hit them. And in most games, I found they're not even programmed. So I can't even really test them effectively unless I map them specifically to something, which I haven't bothered to do yet. I may do that for the final review when I'm doing a little bit more work with Doom Eternal. But overall, I think this is a solid unit. I think if you're going to use it as a hybrid solution, like you're going to use it to take your Steam games on the go and you're going to use it that way, you're going to come back, hopefully have a cloud save to where you can download your save, or your save just naturally downloads back to your PC. You can pick up with your game where you left off. That'll be a great use for this. If you're going to do emulation with it on top of that, it's a good use for that. I've seen emulation set up on this in several ways, and it looks like it actually runs and plays very, very well. I'm looking forward to getting it set up on here. I think Game Pass, even in its experimental phase, looks like it works pretty well. I'm looking forward to trying that out, even though it has me installing a beta version of Edge onto Linux. I'm going to let the Linux mob calm down for a minute. Yes, you have to install it. No, it is not an option. You're going to have to suck it up if you want that thing on here. I understand the sacrilege of putting a Microsoft product on a Linux operating system. I understand. I feel your pain. I can't empathize with it because I don't have options. So, it is what it is. If you want to use that, that's because Game Pass works in a cloud format, so they're going to be running it on their servers, and you're going to be streaming it to your Steam Deck. And I think that's kind of smart as an initial setup. And the reason is because most of those games aren't really guaranteed to work on Linux or don't even have a Linux installer. So even if you had a version of Game Pass that would install on Linux that you could either just set up on the desktop and import it as an external application into Steam so that you could launch it from inside the main Steam Deck without having to go to the desktop, you would still have the issue of most of the games not working on a Linux platform in the first place, because they weren't built for Linux in mind, they were built for Windows in mind. That's why they're on Game Pass. And most games are built for Windows first and Linux is secondary, and a lot of them don't even work on Linux in the first place. So, with that said, it's probably better that they basically do this in more of a cloud format. Now, would I prefer that they do an application and launch a cloud instance from Game Pass with you having a thin client installed? Absolutely. I'd prefer that to Edge. However, this is the option that we have right now, so that's what I'm going to be working with. So, you should have seen some pictures of the hardware on this. I am going to go into a little bit of like the gameplay on this. The first thing I'm going to show you is a little bit of Sonic Generations. You can see as this is on the screen, this runs at a very good clip. I think this actually runs faster than it did on the original Xbox 360, which is no surprise. This is a more powerful piece of hardware than Microsoft's Xbox 360. So the fact that this thing is probably running close to 60 frames a second, I can't guarantee it, but it feels very, very fast and very, very clean. You're going to have a much better experience with Generations now than you probably did on your Xbox. And with being able to use any controller you prefer with this thing, I'm told Xbox Elite controllers work with this, Xbox One controllers work with this, PlayStation controllers work with this, 8-bit controllers work with this. Surely you can find a controller that you're comfortable with if you're not comfortable with the deck itself. Moving on to the next game is that I actually have some footage of is Dead or Alive 6. Now I'm going to show you a little bit of the 1080p footage so that you can see what I mean by being a little bit on the slow side. Now that you've kind of seen that, I'm going to flip it over to the 720p version and let you see that. And I think you should be able to tell that it's a little bit quicker and a little bit more responsive. There's less slowdown, a little bit less chugging. It seems to just be a cleaner experience overall. So what you're going to be looking at now is footage from Doom Eternal. This was taken with me just using it in more handheld mode with it just connected in, which is a little awkward. I actually recommend using a controller for the most part, and primarily because with it connected, if you're holding it, you've got so much weight on one side. I found myself drifting one way or another with the analog sticks, and it just wasn't as precise. And that was just because of the weight distribution. That doesn't have anything to do with the Steam Deck. That's just me and weight distribution. Overall, though, I think they all run clean. They all run great. Some with a few minor tweaks, but then at Steam, it's more of a PC product. You have to expect that sometimes you're going to have to do a few things to get things tailored the way you want them to run. This is not a console. I'm going to stress that. This is more of a Linux PC in a handheld format. This is not a console, okay? If you go into it thinking you're not going to have some PC problems with this, you're probably going to have a bad time. So you have to be willing to tinker with a few things, a little bit here and there, nothing major. Like I said, if you just stick to the stuff that's certified, you're probably not going to have any problems. It's going to install, it's going to run, you're going to have a good time, and that's going to be the end of it. However, if you want to use other things in your library that aren't necessarily certified or have some caveats, expect to tinker with it a little bit in order to make sure that the experience works well for you. That said, I still think it's pretty much worth the purchase if you think you want to take your PC games on the go and you want a more hybrid device. This is a good hybrid device for that. If you're going to buy this for just emulation, don't. Do not buy this just to do emulation. Buy a Series S. Buy a Pi. Install it on your desktop. I don't care, but don't spend $500 or $300 on something that you can do for half the price or less if you just want to do emulation. It just doesn't make any sense. There's cheaper solutions for it that are just as easy to set up, if not easier, because of the way you have to set this thing up in order to get things moved over to it. A Pi is actually easier to set up. A Raspberry Pi is actually easier to set up for emulation than this. As clean as this is going to be for emulation, it's easier to set that up. Because you can just download it to your PC. If you don't have a PC or you don't have a monitor that you can hook this thing up to, you're probably going to be frustrated with the emulation. If you're not comfortable in a desktop environment, you're probably going to be frustrated setting up the emulation. It's probably not going to be fun for you. And you're probably not going to want to do it, or you're going to be annoyed with it. Because there's going to be a lot of weird caveats and stuff that you're going to have to set up manually in order to get it to work. You'd be much better off just buying a unit that has like 1,000 games loaded on it and doing that, as opposed to setting this up and doing this. Now, if you're in for doing the work and getting it set up, this is going to be a very good unit for emulation for you. It's going to be a very flexible unit to be not only Steam, emulation, Game Pass, a little bit of desktop work, because you could install things like Word, you could install like Libre and stuff like that. If you want to do some desktop work on this thing, you've got a desktop. You can do that. It's fine. It's basically a PC. You can do it that way if you want to. Would I recommend doing that? Absolutely not. I recommend using it for games. That's what it's built for. But you have the flexibility of doing some pretty stupid stuff with it if you want to. And that may be the big advantage that a lot of people want with this thing. And if you're going to use it that way, that's great. The one thing I would be leery about is while I was running Dead or Alive, it could have been where I set it down and covered these vents. This thing got really hot. I mean, it got really, really hot. Pretty quick, too. So it was warm. Like, gaming laptop on your lap warm. You don't want it there. I would find a way to elevate it or set it to where it can get some airflow underneath it when you're messing with it. Don't lay it down like I did on top of something else that's pressing up against those vents. Let it sit somewhere where it can get the airflow it needs. And when you pick it up, be careful when you pick it up, because you get your fingers too close to that center and you're going to feel it. It's going to be warm. It won't burn them, but it will be unpleasant. So if you're thinking about strapping an external hard drive to the center's thing and then running things like Horizon Zero Dawn, Doom Eternal, Dead or Alive 6, I wouldn't recommend it. It's probably not going to be good for your hard drive to sit next to something that's that warm. The reason it's as wide as it is, that I suspected, is to keep the heat more here and inward. You can still feel it a little bit to here a lot of times when it gets really warm. But for the most part, they've done a good job of spreading it out to where most of the heat is going to be dissipated in this center area, as opposed to where your hands are going to be. And that's to make sure that you can play it for long periods of time, even in something that's intensive, without having to worry about it singeing your hands or being too warm to the touch. And it should work fine. Because DOA had never had any slowdown, regardless of how warm the device got. It just got noticeably warm, and the battery life drained pretty quickly. So, with that in mind, I think it's a fun product. I've had a good time with it. I'm looking forward to messing with it. I'm looking forward to giving you guys a full review on it. But I definitely wanted to get something out this week so that you guys would know kind of what my initial thoughts were, having had a few days to play with it. Let me know what you would like checked, tested, played around with on this thing. If I haven't mentioned it already and it's something within reason, I'll probably go ahead and mess with it and try to get you guys something up for it. This is probably going to be something I'm going to have series on here on the channel from now on. I'll be testing things that don't necessarily work and seeing if they do work or if I can get them to work, and if I did get them to work, what settings did I use? That way you guys can use that to run these things on the Steam Deck if you have the Steam Deck. I'll be doing a emulation setup. There's tons of videos on that online. I'm going to throw my hat into the ring on that too. Why not? Game Pass, I'll be doing a video on that. So look to see more stuff on this on the channel moving forward now that I have it, and I'm having a pretty good time with it. But until next time, guys, let me know what you guys think of this thing and the product. Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Do you think it's kind of eh? Are you still on the fence about it? Is there anything I can do to kind of clarify things that'll pretty much solve whether or not you might want it one way or another? Let me know. I'll look into it. However, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and until next time, happy gaming.